My name is Suzanne Burns, and I am coming to you from the great pollinating land of Atlanta, Georgia, right now, with the Partnership for Southern Equity and our Just Communities team. We will get started with some real brief kind of orientation intros, and then I am going to hand the mic over to our guest today, Anton Seals Jr. So let's go ahead and dive in with the first couple of slides here. Ashley, can you cue me up to the next slide? Just going to orient a little bit to why we are here. So for those of you who are new to Just Communities, this is our why. These are the principles that we are working to bring into the practice of land use and development so that it is happening in a radically different way that is more equitable and resilient both in the process and in the outcomes. And so these are our principles for Just Communities. Next slide, please. What you will hopefully all be getting to know at this point is the Just Communities Protocol 1.0, which is our foundation for this new framework of Just Communities. And you'll see on the right here some of the sort of essential elements to it, from a process phases that go around the outside. We have commitment areas on the inside, and our pillars of racial equity and climate resilience undergird the entire framework. It is a framework. It is a national standard. It is a community of practice. We're really excited that you have found us today and that you will get a chance to hear from a community leader that we are all very inspired by on our end, who is bringing to life the type of practices that we want to see become the norm, and that we hope Just Communities Protocol will help to guide folks to. Next slide. Before we click over, I just wanted to share, if we could go back real quick, Ashley. I included a couple of links here so that we don't forget towards the end. We do have our next webinar coming up. Actually, that should be in April. With the organization Community for Global Sustainability, who is based out of San Diego, and they'll be sharing with us their zero energy development work. And we want to make sure that everyone knows, if you have not had an opportunity to take the AP Foundations course to get your AP credential, it's available online at your own time at justcommunities.info. We just completed our quarterly Zoom training. We'll have one coming up at the end of June as well, but want to invite you all to be a part of that learning community. Go ahead, next slide. Thanks. And just so you have a sense of who we're, where this work is coming from now, we are based in Atlanta, Georgia, doing work around the region and beyond. And we have expertise in all of these areas related to sort of this intersectional look at where racial equity shows up, where we can find opportunities for working collectively across systems for shared prosperity, not just in Atlanta and the South, but globally. And with that, I am going to give you a little bit of information about our incredible speaker here today. Anton Seals Jr. is the lead steward executive director of Grow Greater Englewood. He is a South Shore Chicago native, a multidimensional servant leader, organizer, entrepreneur, educator, community connector, impact producer, all-around Renaissance guy. Grow Greater Englewood is a social enterprise focusing on building an equitable and resilient local food system that fosters protection of vacant land in divested communities and focuses on connecting those residents with community wealth building opportunities. He focuses on authentic equity in action via community engagement, advocacy policies, social enterprise, and arts and culture. He has a illustrious career and bio. I am not going to take more time away from his conversation with you today. So just leave you with the couple of accolades that he is a 2018 Next City Vanguard Fellow, was a 2010 German Marshall Fellow, and today he is going to share with you the amazing work that he is leading at Grow Greater Englewood. And with that, I will let you share your screen, Anton, and take it away.
Well, while I get that queued up, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for everybody for joining today as I queue up my screen. Um, Again, I'm really excited that the Partnership for Southern Equity and the Just Communities program offered for me to come and speak. And I said, yeah, we've been going back and forth for several months. I think even the way that we found each other was really great. Um, because of the work that we've been doing on the ground and because of all of the kind of community-led work that's been happening in Chicago, I wanted just to ground us today in terms of like what we're here to talk about, to share, and to kind of cut through this kind of myth like that, somebody has like the blueprint or the magic pill. That's not true. But what we can do is just share some of the strategies and work that is happening on the south side of Chicago for the other parts of America that have already been forgotten about and often aren't articulated in a really sharp way in our political discourse. So just to ground us, our work is always grounded in purpose. We always ask, as an ancient African proverb, is how are the children? You know, when you stop to really think about that, how are our children? What will we be doing to support and think about our children when they are no longer the children? And then also think about that we were once the children as well. This offers us to kind of settle us into the real kind of purpose of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the future is, and where we come from. So we sit with that, and I ask you all to sit with that as well. To always ground our work in that. How are the children? Um, right now, on the south side of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, in Chicago and Illinois, in the United States, there's a lot of that question being asked right now. So as Suzanne mentioned, Grow Greater Englewood, our vision is an African-centered community in which all people have resources to live safe, happy, healthy lives and fulfilling lives. We do gather, and we believe that there's enough room for everyone in the village. I think that is the secret sauce that has always endured and has held Black people in this country as Americans, as Black Americans in this experience, as African people. So all those things are what we bring to bear in our work on the South Side of Chicago. Our mission, as Suzanne mentioned, is we're a social enterprise, so we kind of always are looking at how do we use kind of the solidarity economy, how do we create revenue that pulls us away from just having to fund ourselves through philanthropic resources only, and to further kind of connect the community back to the work that we're doing. That takes a lot of organizing and a lot of ongoing kind of institutional building. I was reminded the other day from one of the Babas in the community who is of note, Baba Hakeem Matabuti, who reminded me that we are an independent Black organization and an institution, and what the work that we're doing, that's a collective work. And there are many hands that have made this work. So Grow Great Englewood is but one organization in Englewood and one organization across the South Side, and just one organization. But one of the things that has given us that strength is to be able to empower ourselves to kind of define what land sovereignty, what local food economy, what green businesses look like by remaining open to the young people who continue to come. I am still a young person, but I ain't as young as I used to be. Um, so, that work for us looks like, our big three drivers are we build, we connect, and we protect. We have our Englewood Village Farms program, in which we are converting vacant lots over for small scale farmers and growers. We've been teetering with this model. We have about 6 farms across Englewood, and we continue to try to establish even more. So that is a big part of our work. We have a great team of farmers and a network of farmers, both locally and in the region. So we always approach it from a urban, peri-urban, and rural strategy, and also a national strategy. There's a national network of farmers and growers who are also very much centered in the African value system as well. Our other big project is the Englewood Nature Trail, which is a 2 mile long trail, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. The Englewood Village Plaza, which we'll talk about as well, and the market that we hold there. This is our 6th year having our Englewood Village Farmers Market there on 58th and Halsted. We also do the Backyard Gardens program and our Englewood Food Sovereignty Network program, which is like our mutual aid. Our Backyard Gardens program is building raised beds in the backyards of many residents. And then we also created the Englewood Community Land Trust as a level of protection, which we'll talk about a little bit more down this line as well. So when we say food sovereignty, what does it mean? And so we have the 7 pillars of food sovereignty that we really reflect on, that guides our work, that focuses on food for people, that continues to try to build knowledge and skills for people in our community. We work with nature. We're not above or below it. We work with it. We localize our food system. So we have continuously been working on this for the last 10 years, if not more, to try to really figure out what does it mean to have control over your supply chain. Now more than ever, putting the control locally, that means that we also have to do a lot of groundwork to make sure that people have more than just produce, that there is a network of folks who are, feeding us. To remember that food is sacred. In American culture, it is, we approach it from a much more uh, enjoyment and fulfilling and joyful kind of sedative. But food is actually sacred in order to give us the fuel for our nourishment that is needed. And then we also have to value the hands and the food providers, the farmers, the labor. There is so much richness in what it means to kind of have a food sovereign space and organization. So that work is ongoing, and that work is not a straight path either. So, but I'm not going to go super deep in our farming work today because I only have a limited amount of time. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned there around farming in urban spaces at scale, and growing nutrient dense food, making sure that you have a really robust kind of thriving ecosystem on your farms. So it's not just production. So all these things are very important in terms of food sovereignty. Just a little bit about me. I am a servant leader. I am the lead steward. So this organization was started as a coalition, myself, and now our state rep Sonia Harper, who I would say were the mama and the babbas of the organization. But it was also held by, the Resident Association of Greater Englewood, which was a great incubator for a lot of the energy that was happening in Englewood at that time. So big shout out to that work and that format. And all of us who were doing this work. I come to this work via policy, working for Congressman Rush, doing a lot of the work that the Congressional Black Caucus doesn't get much credit for, but codifying the usage and the way that we look at food deserts came out of a lot of that activism that was happening at the ground level in Chicago on the south and west sides, and that was happening all over the country. So it became a framework in which now, almost 15 years later, if not longer, is now standard. Now, it was always flawed in terms of how the food deserts were kind of monikered versus the reality, which is much more akin to what Mama Karen and New York would say is food apartheid, right? I am committed to the community. I'm a Baba. I'm a son. I'm a husband. And so I'm a grandson of Mississippi. So all of these things of Louisiana are important that we bring this to the work. And then I also want to just say here in terms of leadership, I work with a huge network of amazing Black men and women, Latino men and women on the South Side, where we're always in struggle. And I believe that right now that is what is maintaining us, in particular now, that becomes our guide to be able to lean on each other for sources of abundance, for sources of integrity, for conviction, in order to take on this next round of work that we have to do. So I want to just kind of ground everybody. I'm not sure where the audience is coming from, but this kind of gives you a sense of where Englewood is on the south side of Chicago. It is the heart of Chicago. And if you don't know West Englewood and Englewood, it's one neighborhood, but they're actually two neighborhoods together. So Chicago is has about 77 neighborhoods in the city. We are quite neighborhood centric. That has become even more increasingly so over the last, in particular, over the last since the 80s, during the kind of neoliberal regime. And I won't go too deep into that, but I think that there is a level of balkanization that happened with a lot of the neighborhoods. The south side and west side of Chicago is a unique feature because of the segregation in the city that now has also been its strength. So often we talk about segregation as a negative. I think the cultural kind of things that we have in our communities on the south and west side, in particular of these black, predominantly black communities, is important and need to be preserved and protected. But for us, that also means that we are always been an open community, that we are not repeating or trying to mimic what we see in white dominant culture either. So there has to be a different way forward. And I think that that is what is coursing through our veins as the children of the diaspora, as the children of those who survived the enslavement here on these grounds in America, and then those who are indigenous, those who have been almost erased from the memories of their own lands. So this is so important for us to ground it in that. So this kind of gives you some data in terms of like the height of Chicago. As you can see here, this community has endured so much, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. You know, Chicago became America's kind of next big city, in particular during the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. It grew, as you can see, and that's why it became the second city. And as you can see, it's been in a kind of rapid, somewhat decline over the last several decades. But in Englewood and West Englewood, you can see at the height of our population, which is almost at 118,000 in 1980. And if you go to just to 1950, you can see that there's almost very little folks who live in Englewood who are black. And as you know, that these are some factors here that are so important for us to kind of unpack. But before I kind of get into some of those issues, one of the things I wanted to just kind of note, to note is that one of our America's finest literature minds and writers comes from Englewood, is the class of 1948 from Englewood High School. She actually went to school with my grandmother. And I'm always fascinated by that history of Miss Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote Raisin in the Sun. And not only did she write Raisin in the Sun, her father was the main lawyer who brought the case to the Supreme Court to end the racial covenants that were blanketing Chicago and so many other cities across the North. But I wanted to share a quote with you that Lorraine that stuck with me that I want to share today, which is she says, "What is it about these Negroes hated so and still dishing out these love warriors, which we are, to live with integrity?" That stuck with me because that is the work that we've all been called to do in this particular time, and that work will continue. So we are soldiers of love, and it's not just a fluffy love. It is a love for our people. It's a love for a different way that we have to. That these kind of assaults, these attacks that are happening and will increase right now because they have been emboldened, but they are also very weak because they do not feed and do not have the integrity needed in order for this country to flourish. But just below that are all of those people. So what she really talks about it is not just the Negroes in terms of the skin, because it has nothing to do, as many of you know, with just our skin color. That is a concept and a construct that was created. It's much deeper than that, around standing for integrity, for justice, these liberty, some of the main foundations that keep us all bound here in this country. So we have to remember that. And I always thought that that was a really good thing that Lorraine kind of left that quote. So Lorraine Hansberry, big ups to your work. Um, but I wanted to just to kind of pivot back to what has been happening in this community. As you can see, the decline in population and what we've been experiencing in Chicago, not just in Englewood and West Englewood. So next to all these communities are other Black communities, are other Latino communities. And if we start with urban renewal down to redlining, which I would definitely give a big shout out to my sister Tonika Johnson, who has been doing the work around inequity for sale. You can talk up that talks about what is happening, what happened in our Black communities around housing, around the inequity that was promoted, and it's still forward happening today, which we'll talk about as well. The housing covenants, which I mentioned, the contract sales that happen in this community, the abandonment of public housing, which further impacted this community in terms of extremely, poor people moving into an already working class, poor neighborhood. The war on drugs completely devastated Englewood and West Englewood. The Great Recession that then followed, where this was ground zero for a lot of the housing kind of shady business and tactics that happened, and then left us with a lot of vacant lots. As you can see, as the population decreased, this was a central hub on the south side of Chicago where there was railroads just south of the meatpacking stockyard businesses. So this was a working class community initially that was filled during the early parts of the 20th century with mostly a lot of new European immigrants who were coming to this country, Lithuanians, a lot of Eastern Europeans, Irish, who then settled in these communities. So this is important for us to kind of track what these pieces are. And then we get to the closed schools, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. So all of these have left the community, and is this map here you can see these clusters of the purple, vacant owned, city owned land, and also CPS schools that were closed. Those big purple globs you see is where the Black Chicago pretty much resides on the south and west side. And so these maps are not, eye-opening to people who, wherever we are, there's kind of been a trace of that in terms of the abandonment of democracy, of the liberal order or the conservative order, not delivering to the American taxpayer, which would be us as well, who sometimes they kind of forget about that. And then lastly, I just want to kind of highlight this because the death gap that's been talked about in Chicago is so important. And for us, this is really what community wealth building is all about. Community wealth building is not just about, us having money. The community wealth building is really about the health of the community. And as you can see here, the life expectancy is quite vast between two different neighborhoods. Almost 30 years when you get to some parts of our neighborhood, which is in Englewood, the average lifespan is 66 years old, right? And that is such a huge part of what drives our work. It is the metric in which we want to move. But this would take a really concerted effort for us to kind of really dig in much deeper than how it's actually being has been happening over the last 30 years. So I think that there's some upsides to this kind of political upheaval that is happening right now. Next, you can kind of see that the big part of this driver is the chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes. These numbers kind of bear out wherever African Americans are in our major cities or in our rural areas. They may give or take. I think the homicide rate is a big part of what also drives the lack of life expectancy or the growing disparity between life expectancy. So for us, this is like at the central part of like what community wealth building has to be tied to is the public health component. So it is not just about um, growing money or having money for stability, but we know that they're connected because these are things in which you're able to kind of prevent and to address. So I want to just kind of then segue into like what the city of Chicago's been doing. Many of us over the last, I would say since 2018, 2017, have been demanding and pushing that there needed to be new ways, new avenues for us to address, these huge disparities that I just laid out. During the pandemic, during the when the recovery plan came out, Chicago decided to do a lot of work around community wealth building. There was many advocates who said we need to think about wealth building in a much different way. And that work has to continue. I think that this is something of a ray of hope that we have to be able to continue to push progressive and ideas that are coming from the community as policies, as opposed to allowing those to be dissipated or disparaged by those who seek to continue to extract. So it was a big piece for us to kind of convince the city of Chicago at that time to build out this vision of a democratic and reparative economy. Even in the language that we're using, we want to kind of connect it that the ability to thrive without extracting from people or the environment in that process. That statement alone is a huge one in which we have to really start to think about that that is an affront to racial capitalism. So that is why there's often, there's not really well received. There's a lot of barriers to the work. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is to make sure that we were building out an ecosystem. And this is so important for us to kind of understand at the core of like when the technical word of like, well, what does it mean to have community wealth? The way that we're defining it, it also is the shared wealth. So shared wealth, not the sum of wealth of multiple households either. So we have to think about that or the whole community. It is defined by the different models and local democratic and also shared ownership and control of community assets. That's how a group of all of us in Chicago, residents, stakeholders, thought about community wealth building to give it a frame. So it's a collective of individuals and it's a whole neighborhood, but not the drive the sum of that wealth. So I think that that level of education is still it's tremendous because there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to kind of unpack that for people. I think the so as you can see here, there's a lot of work that has been done, and it's at the point where I think because the federal monies had run out, the question and the barriers, the challenges, are things that we have to be able to be clear about. And I wanted to just share that with you all. The big one is, around public education, as I mentioned. You know what I mean? This is tremendous for you to kind of push forward community wealth building initiatives. Access to capital, um, that has been a tremendous barrier. We have been able to leverage over the last several years, during the last 5 to 6 years, to leverage to be able to kind of begin to put together an ecosystem. But now we're at the space where it has to continue. And so when I also send some links to the partnership to kind of share some of this work broadly from the city that is now morphed into a much larger community wealth building kind of ecosystem that stands alone. The capacity at the community level is super important. Who knows how to do this? Like, what does it really mean? It is a lot of work. You know what I mean? So that is not. I think sometimes these models are marketed as very trade chic, but they take a lot of hands, a lot of patience, and that then leads to the other kind of challenge that we have. The democratic decision making process is not one that's a very simple one or fast, which is in its benefit. So it's not always a negative, but you have to keep that in mind. And then, the kind of local expertise, who knows how to do is the lawyers, the who understands how things are moving in certain communities currently, policy, all of these, other folks who have independent resources. And then there are a few examples for the community to actually see. So sometimes this work at this level gets really bound in that sense. So it's really important for us to kind of think about that. But I wanted to give you all the sense of like the community wealth building that's been talked about and how the community is also talking about like our real wealth is our health and connecting these two. That is the ground that we have to continue to kind of push for. But how that shows up in our work, but then how does that show up in our families? How does that become part of the culture? And how do we really get? And I think that there's some elements that are already, in existence. So here's a few examples of some of the kinds of strategies that we've been looking at. Work on cooperatives. So there's a group of us who are doing that. So big shout out to the Chicago Solidarity Economy Group. which has established a few and even more work on cooperatives. We have a landscape and lawn care cooperative that is called Earth Seeds. We have Shot Fresh Kitchens. We have a new one that is going to be doing snack foods. And these co-ops are right now being led by young African American young women who are returning from, returning citizens from the carceral state. So there's been a concerted effort to make sure that we organize, and these things take time, but there's some successes there, and we definitely will share some of the work in the network. Limited equity housing cooperatives, as you can see here, is another strategy to make sure that housing. So housing is a whole nother. I could probably do a whole piece on housing um, issue, and land is a whole issue that kind of, how do we maintain permanent affordability? In particular, what does that word affordability really look like now? So community land trust. So this is where I think in Englewood, these two um, models are where we have been pursuing. We've established a land trust. So I want to just, thank the land trust, our leadership, Kadar and JT Stinnett, who's our legal backing, and then their board. And then, for us as Grow Greater Englewood, we got into the land trust wanting to use the vehicle in order to gain access to vacant lots to grow more food. But part of what the struggle has been for us over the last several years since it's been established is that when we hear from residents, the need for housing is so immediate and dire. So that is something that we are, have to relook and adjust our own, work that we're doing to be able to meet the needs of the people, not just the needs, not just our kind of mission and vision only. And so we've really kind of taken some of that to heart and to be able to kind of think about how to utilize the land trust, which is also a big vehicle. And you need also those kind of same things I talked about in terms of access to capital, resources, know-how to get it done. The last piece is where we also, I think, have a lot of energy in our community investment vehicles. I want to give also a big shout out to Community Desk that is helping several of the groups in Englewood. So the work that we are doing that I'm going to show in a minute around the nature trail is just but one corridor in Englewood. Englewood is quite a big neighborhood, not necessarily in terms of population, but in land mass comparative to other Chicago neighborhoods. So one of the things that we're working on is kind of a master plan of development across multiple corridors. One of the things that we've noticed with the public coffers is and philanthropic is that the need is so great, but it's not being met with the kind of resource in order to really replenish. So I'm sure many of you all struggle with the same kinds of like, here's 5 million, but what you really need is 150 million to do just this part. So I think this also gets into a larger conversation for many of us on the ground around what does this reparative, reparational kind of work look like in this kind of post-MAGA world in America. So I think that that's some of the exciting stuff that politically can happen from all this because there's work that's being done by American citizens in these crazy, and not even just citizens, Americans who are here to try to deal with these kind of issues. So I think this is really going to be important. So the CIVs, as they are called, and we can share even more information, are great assets for us to think about, shared values and development goals. And this also gets into the kind of opportunities for community ownership. So you hear this language around the solidarity economy. It is at the ground level, and it continues to needs to be nurtured. So that I think that's going to continue to be a big challenge. So for us, the Englewood Agro Eco District work that we've been doing, we put together a community repair compact framework. And so part of that work and was grounded as our culture, public safety, housing, jobs, public goods, ownership, business, and also education. We saw all of these as kind of critical things that our compact has to address. And what we also wanted to do is to make them actually actionable. So that we sometimes, as all of us, we spend a lot of time in community putting together plans, but things are moving so fast. So you have to be able to stay nimble and to be able to continue to organize the residents to bring them to these kinds of work that we, and then these for us are our neighbors around what does it look like and then how do we enact them. So that's where the land trust came in. So this is what we have developed. And we put the land trust together because there's so much vacant land near the trails that we have been working on. So I think it's super important for us to kind of understand just how big just this stretch of land that we're doing in our project. And so one of the reasons why we came up with the land trust is to make sure that we could stabilize the community. So as you can see here, we want to turn a lot of the vacant land into assets that serve our needs, like the urban farms, affordable housing, and creating more open spaces that are these now what have been called third spaces or creative place keeping, so that the culture that lives there can maintain there. And so one of the things, because we're doing an infrastructure reuse project, which is the Englewood Nature Trail, these trails sometimes can spur gentrification. So when we are in a community that has high poverty and foreclosure crisis, the food insecurity, so while it does pose a risk of rising property values. So that is something that we have to continue to tend with, because on one end, for the independence of the American culture, people want to be able to say their investment is their home. But then what does that look like in terms of a community, in particular, a predominantly Black community where those homes have been undervalued? So there's a lot of work that has to be done there. And then it also could force out some of the residents. So one of the things that is ongoing is that we have to be able to continue to build the trust between neighbors around what the collective needs are. I think that that really makes a big difference in terms of, but is also in competition with how we think about capitalism. So I think that no matter what, that those are things that we are still going to have to go through the challenges, because right now, if you say you want more affordable housing, people might think badly about that, right? Or that affordable housing costs too much, right? And then what does really protecting long-term residents really look like? So one of the things that we had to pivot to for our action step was that we had to think about how do we preserve our homeowners. The baby boomers are, aging up and aging out. And they are the one big generation that had more access to, over the last 60, 70 years, which we're kind of engaged with now in terms of the rollbacks of being able to own a home and to be able to own multiple homes or having a second, an income property. But there's a dire need for urgent home repairs. There are 40 properties near our trail that are at risk. So, we need to be expanding and be able to have an emergency. Most of the funds that are created are cumbersome. People need relief from tax bills, which is something that we need to really see at the policy level. People need relief from water bills. And so it's like a downward spiral and this impacts our wealth building in the Black community in particular. And then the other part is like, how do we, renovate and, turn blighted properties, you know what I mean, into something oases. And that's kind of where our jam has been in terms of the open space as it connects to the trail. And what it will look like moving forward with other partners is how do we take advantage and in control of putting those resources back into the community. So we've got to figure out, not only in Chicago, but in our country, $250,000 is not affordable if you only got a job that you can't make but $20 an hour and you're not getting 40 hours a week. Like, some of the math is not mathing, as they would say. So something's got to give, right? So the policies that are being pushed, and I think that the tension is that, what belongs for the public is being in question because of the racial kind of redo of Reconstruction 2.0, that everybody isn't American, you know what I mean? But there's tons of folks who are being subsidized in this country from taxpayer dollars who don't actually need it. But those are folks who are running the country right now. So I think these are things that we have to be really clear about and not afraid to talk about. Because we have been here, in particular Black people in our history in this country, from before it was a country. So we have to speak with that level of conviction, and we have to speak with that level of like we're connected to a much global movement that's beyond the United States of America. I think that we have to also think about that. So these are the kind of strategies at the local level that get at some of the heart of like why racial capitalism fails, because this is what it leaves you, right? It leaves you with these kind of levels of insecurity. So this is not um, justice for all. So just transitioning a little bit into the trail work. And so you can see here, these are two kind of renderings, an aerial view of the trail. So the trail is about 2 miles long, as you can see here. And it is embedded as an old abandoned railroad. And it goes from one end of Englewood, which is on the eastern end, and it's capped by two large intermodal rail yards, one being CSX, the other being Norfolk Southern, which have been traditionally really, not great corporate partners at all. But nonetheless, you have to be able to keep pushing. But this was a big push to be able to get this land because it had been abandoned. And on the eastern end, there was a huge push to try. It was a big kerfuffle and a land grab essentially that happened on the eastern end. It was a straight up land grab. But this gets into the complexity of the individual versus the collective. So on the eastern end, the intermodal yard expanded, the city eminent domain, lots of land. And there, of course, were people who did not want to leave. But there were people at that point who also had taken the money. So it kind of gets into this kind of real, when you get in the weeds, um, it is a lot more complex than how sometimes the narrative is pitched. Um, but what came from some of that also was the community activating and saying, you need to give up something. And so this plot of land that is 2 miles long that's elevated was one of the give backs to the community that the railroad owned. So they gave it back to the city. But I think at the time, they also didn't realize that this would actually be a thing. So the level of advocacy that it took over the last 10 years to even make this thing a thing, to be able to give it life has taken a lot. And then have Black people lead on this and this level, this kind of complex infrastructure reuse project is important. And so we continue to push because we have to be able to move this piece forward. So we did last August. We were able to pass the Englewood Agro Equals the land use plan. So it's very important for us to kind of get that plan going. And I'm going to kind of push a little further because I know I'm at my 15-minute mark. But here you can see the amount of vacancy and the kinds of land uses that we're looking to bring and attract in the community. So the community is in need of not just retail jobs. We need industry and sectors to grow. And that has been a big challenge to try to convince the powers of our economic forces in our city and private and corporate businesses that don't usually look at our communities to locate. And then from the ground up, getting the resources that are needed for those businesses that want to grow and expand in their own communities. So we're looking at both ends, but right now it's just such a huge piece. These are some of our guiding principles of the land use project, our land use plan, which is community first, strength, health and security, and stabilize. We have to be able to do these things in order for this trail to actually have an impact. So it's very important for us. Pathways for work and wealth. So we want to make sure that as this trail is, which is an $80 million project that was funded through the RAISE grant in 2022. We have a bunch of farms, and we have a network of farms. We are integrating our culture, arts and culture, so that is reflective of the beautiful tradition of Black people who call this place home. And then the designing of each part, the design for the community, with the community, is very important and has been a great success for us. Here are some of the land uses that the community wants to see near the trail. So we already have a few public parks. We definitely are pushing that there should be more investment in our public parks as a strategy for public health, to kind of reduce public violence, that they're kind of programming, thinking outside of the box there. The agricultural sites having both business and spaces where people can get nutrient dense food. is very important. We need to have the kind of the neighborhood commercial centers, small scale, mid-sized businesses, restaurants, markets, food, education facilities in some of these mixed use buildings. We want to do small and local manufacturing. So we think that that's a huge opportunity there. Residential, and then also neighborhood cultural sites, where people want to be able to visit and learn and feel what it means to be a Black, resident. Our culture is worth saving, and we deserve beautiful spaces. So lastly, as I kind of wrap up, I wanted to just kind of big shout out to our partner in all things beautiful, which is Botanical City and their work. So this space that you're looking at here would be the entry point to the Englewood Nature Trail. This is something that we have been intentionally working towards over the last 3 to 4 years. That art piece you see there in the middle there, the circle, is by Mr. Jermaine Barnes, who is a tremendous artist who is doing amazing things from the west side of Chicago. So what we wanted to do in our plaza is to make sure that there was this space where the land is being healed by what we're being very intentional about what we're planting, right? So one of the strategies I want to really talk about is like why we are doing it in this particular way. It is slow, but it makes a lot more sense in terms of how do we, use the trees that we have for phytoremediation to kind of pull a lot of the toxins out of the land. How do we plant more trees? So we are working with these are positive things that were happening under the Inflation Reduction Act. More trees being planted, greening our neighborhood helps in terms of decreasing the amount of poor air quality we have in the neighborhood. We still have a tremendous way to go because there's a lot of, and the reason we did a land use plan because there's a lot of scrap metal, all kinds of just businesses that by right we're opening up because we are in a poor community and people can just do whatever. And so that's why we wanted to have some level, the community needs to have some level of control. The aldermen and the community residents to be able to kind of green light what goes on in the community. And then for us, looking at the community in this agro eco district, the reason that we took this approach is that not only for the trail, but on the blocks, on the residential blocks, there's a tremendous opportunity to kind of do strategic plantings of plants that are native to the Illinois region, to region 5, 6, to be able to heal the land as well, right? So there was a lot of things that had happened. So these are some images of the what was and what is happening and where we are now. This kind of gives you an aerial that there are multiple of these kind of hubs that are across the 2 miles. So we have, our agro eco district kind of piece at Low where we're going to be, which is our next big project to be able to do, a whole nursery and greenhouse at the end of the trail and create a place for us to have some level of commerce. It's going to be very important. Excuse my voice. And another rendering here that kind of looks at, why we're being very specific around trees and plants are part of that. We're not disconnected from nature, you know. So I think for all of us at Englewood, we really kind of figured out like for us, it's like we deserve beautiful spaces. And so, all the elements of the fire, the land, the air, and the water, which I didn't add to this particular piece, is really important for us to kind of look at the whole health and wellness of our community. Um, I'm just super thankful for you all allowing. I think I was able to get it in and allow for some questions for the last 10 minutes. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're on Facebook, on social media. Um, we are in a really particular time, but I think that there's an opportunity for us who stand on the work and the shoulders of so many to continue to work and to be able to pour into the next generation of the work that's being done. It's so important for us to kind of have that message of resilience and hope, to demonstrate that with our work, not just with our words. And I just want to just thank you all again on the Partnership for Southern Equity for inviting me to share what we've been doing in Englewood. And excuse my voice, I'm getting over a cold. And I think if we have some time for some questions, it'd be great. I think I got it right in the nick of time.
Oh, that was fantastic, Anton. We definitely have some things popping in the Q&A. And I'm trying to, just in the interest of time, maybe see if there's some themes and group a few together. But I'm definitely seeing two or three here that I think are sort of keying in on um, the the element of displacement that we know, is something that is not something we can consider an unintended consequence anymore. When you do things to invest in a community, and you talked about that being a big part of what motivates y'all with the land trust work. And so there were a couple of questions here sort of coming from that anti-displacement thinking around whether you have been able to create plans around limiting property tax increases, how you may have learned from other examples of what not to do, and whether the relationship with the city of Chicago has helped in some of this regard. So I wonder if you could maybe touch on a little bit of that element of curiosity people have.
Yeah, I think for me and for Englewood, I mean, this is a big ongoing kind of organizing struggle that we have, because you're talking about forces. When you talk about displacement, you're really talking about something much deeper around, you know, these individuals that make up community who also want to participate in the buying and selling of real estate, right? Who see it as an opportunity, their liberty to kind of come in and do what they want to be able to do, right?
Yep.
Whether it is, for most of our, we can say it's a lot of outside actors that is already happening, but there are a lot of people within the community also see this as a opportunity to build wealth,
Yep.
right? And it is in that is their tension, that is a tension. So it's kind of like you have a paradox here. Working with the city has been helpful, but only to a certain extent. I think the level of politics plays a huge role around, how much do your elected officials know? We have a great alderman, and she's been, helpful in terms of like we have to address some of these things, but we also need the county. You know what I mean? Like, so one of the things that we've been looking at is, how do we create a protective shield for a certain amount of zone around? That's where the compact comes in, so that homeowners, as this thing comes, don't have an increase in taxes. But before we can even get to that point, the more immediate need is people who are going to lose their homes to the tax sale to begin with. So what we're trying to do now is to work with a group of folks who, because we don't have a deep bench around housing advocacy, right? So we have to rely and work with other people who are working on housing. And because we are living in a community that has some of the most amount of city-owned land, one of the things that's been in the news in Chicago recently is even the private land since the debacle of the foreclosure crisis. I don't know if many people have heard it, but like over 800 parcels of land was owned by one woman who racked up $25 million worth of back taxes and fines and fees. That should be illegal, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to deal with right now with the Hillco property is to call on the city to protect, right? While many in the private industry want to be able to come in and see an opportunity, right? And so, but you don't know how many of those private, like this gets into like, there are thousands of people in our community who have, they have a right to in their mind also. So we have to be able to bring everybody still together because it's not a simple answer. So sometimes I think where we've moved in terms of displacement is like, if you just do this, then you don't have displacement. Well, that's not true. That is not true. And I think sometimes people feel like if you, because the opposite is like, then what do you do? Do you do nothing and the community stays as is? And that's not what the community wants. So there is some tension there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, gosh, we've got 5 minutes, and I see a couple of hands up and several great questions in the chat. And the having the hands up is actually a surprise to me. I didn't realize that would work. So I see Joe James had his hand up first. Joe, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I think so. Is that
All
correct?
right, jump on in.
Well, Anton, congratulations on all the great stuff you're doing. I'm so excited to hear about it. I served as commissioner for economic development under Rich Daley probably 25, 30 years ago. And one of the things I was able to do was to create state enterprise zone areas in Chicago. You didn't mention the state, but those areas do get incentives to encourage business development, things like that. Before you answer that, I'm now a climate tech entrepreneur, and I grow very fast and large growing crops to not only capture lots of carbon dioxide, but their roots are great at remediating contaminated sites. They contribute to that remediation. And, Chicago, like all older cities, has lots of brownfield sites. And while planting a tree here or there can help to, over time, clean those sites up, an intense application of our crops might be able to speed up that process and then allow you to later have more of a forested area that you might like. So I put my contact information in the chat. If there's some
Okay.
ways that we can help you out, I'd be glad to do that. But I just wanted to give you a shout out and congratulate you for what you're doing. And
I
I love
appreciate that, Joe.
Chicago, except in the midwinter.
Yeah, well,
So
the winters aren't that bad, but I will say just quickly because I know we're almost at time, but I would say, this is the reason why we created the community compact. So even as businesses potentially want to come in and move and do work, that they are in partnership with community, right? And that level of equity of sharing, having residents benefit is so important. So we, working through those kind of businesses that want to come, like this is a community that has been, as I laid out, devastated, right? So sometimes we get businesses who have great ideas. They want to come, they want to make the money, but then they don't want to really share any of the profits. Well, we have to move away from some of those, and that's what's come up a lot in this compact work is, and community wealth building in particular, is like, where are there levels of the investment vehicles for the community to benefit? Say if said 3 or 4 businesses come and they are taking off, then you have some what's called passive income. And then lastly, Suzanne, this is how white America made, that is how they increased their wealth gap. That is like
the, the
not a
only the
secret.
only the only thing I'd like to add is take a look at the boundaries of the enterprise zones. I think there are more than one in the
Yep.
city, and see whether areas of your community that should be included might be by amending the boundaries to some extent. That might help you out with
Okay.
both the local businesses who want incentives to help expand their operations or grow their operations. So again, congratulations. Thanks for the
Thanks, Joe.
opportunity to chat.
Thanks, Joe. Oh goodness, there's a really great question in the chat here, Anton, from Lynn Young, and you'll probably just be able to barely touch on it, but she's really curious about the sort of sequence of events of building out this community wealth ecosystem. So I wonder if maybe there's sort of a first step or two that you might be able to share and direct her to maybe some other content on your website, or we can
Well,
follow
yeah,
up.
we can share. So one of the things, I come to this work as an organizer. So even outside of the work of Grow Greater Englewood, I'd already been involved, probably too involved in so many other things. And I think that had been, just being active. And one of the things I think that happened, the timing was one. So the sequence was, we had been pushing under Mayor Emanuel's administration to kind of think about like, how are the other ways for wealth building to happen? What are other, I come from, what's, what they can now call the woke or the left, as a black person, like we've been woke since whatever, you know what I mean? Like that's part of our lexicon. So all this like language that is in popular culture is like ain't really apropos for what like when it hits the streets, right? And it's from the streets that these things is like we've got to figure out what does this look like if I'm going to open a business. Then yeah, you can have a straight ahead capitalist, because you still have to have a successful business. But if it is successful, how many people are willing to share those profits, right? How many people are willing to think about it in a communal sense, right? And that level of education is not how American culture is in education is happening right now. Most people are, if I've got something, I'm going to make all the money. I'm doing all the work. It's an I before the we. And in our community, there's such a need for more of the we. And then the second part I would just add is that then bringing that kind of organizing that to your political bodies, in particular now that this particular administration at the federal level is going to be trying to snatch a lot of stuff back or reconfigure it, repipe. But as Americans, as Black Americans, we're going to be all up in through there. You know what I mean? So this is not no just you're going to just do what you want to do with my tax dollars. There's no taxation without representation. So that's where we are in this country. We're not going to just go backwards. We come too far to go back. And quite frankly, the rest of America, like, we're not trying to relitigate whether, because your skin color lacks better if you are a better human. I mean, it's asinine. You know what I mean? But I think because people are in fear because of the education, right? What has to happen is that more of us on the ground are communicate. So I would be more than happy to share, you know what I mean, and connect. And this is not an answer. These are things that we have to attempt, and you have to adjust the attempts in your community because you know the politics, you know the people, and you have to give yourself time and grace and keep the circle open. There are things sometimes people fall out with each other. Have that grace to be able to find ways that you can align yourselves because for us, it comes back to our grounding principle, which is how are our children? This is what we are leaving all of our children. So that's what I would say in terms of that sequencing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Anton, I wish we had another hour with you. We could start to scratch the surface a little bit more on the things that I know folks are really eager to go deeper on. But we want to honor your time, honor everyone else's time today. We will find a way to get some follow up with you, and maybe we need to bring you back for another webinar
I
later
mean,
on.
yeah, and what I would also just offer too is that there is the power of our work is the network.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage of like, that even stripping our ideas of what leadership is that, I'm voicing this, but I work really strongly with a group, a cadre, and it continues to grow. And as we get older, we have to share as the junior elders now the lessons so
Yeah.
that the next generation does not have to fall into repeating the same things. And as the elders, we have to be able to adjust to allow for the young people to bring new energy and new ideas and new attempts, right?
Oh,
So I want to thank everybody for coming. And if you guys want to reach out, we are more than happy to reach out and, help and assist any way I can. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, all these different, we're on social media. So yeah, please feel free.
well, Anton, thank you so much. This has been a gift to all the folks who were able to join us and those that'll listen to it later. Thanks for your wisdom and passion and watching out for our children.
Thank you so much.
Everybody have a great rest of the day, and please check out your email. You'll see a notice for our next webinar coming up next month. Again, go check out justcommunities.info to try to find ways that you can engage in part of this growing network of folks who care about these ideas that you heard about today and want to be working on these things together. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Suzanne. Peace.
Peace.
All power to all the people.